episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with another fascinating guest helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people. Today we are going to continue on our virtual road trip. We're going to head down to Washington, D.C. again to our friends at the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. And we're going to be meeting up with Dr. Gil Alterovitz, who is the director of the National Artificial Intelligence Institute at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, where he focuses on their mission to develop artificial intelligence research and development capabilities at the VA as a means to support veterans, their families, survivors, and caregivers. The Institute also designs and collaborates on large-scale AI research and development initiatives, national AI policy, and partnerships across agencies, industries, and academia. Dr. Alterovitz has led national and international collaborative initiatives for developing novel informatics methods and approaches for integrating clinical, pharmaceutical, and genomic information from research to point of care. He's a member of the Precision Medicine Task Force under the White House Office of the National Coordinator. He's also one of the core writers of the White House Office of Science and Technology and Policy's National Artificial Intelligence Research and Development Strategic Plan. Dr. Alterovitz has degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Carnegie Mellon in electrical, biomedical, and computer engineering, including a doctorate. He's a professor at Harvard Medical School and the director of the Biocybernetics Laboratory at Brigham and Women's Hospital. His work on integrative methods for big data and in the biomedical informatics space has been published and presented in over 50 peer-reviewed publications, ranging from academic journals to international conferences to 3 books, including Systems Bioinformatics and Engineering Case-Based Approach, which was ranked highly in the Amazon Bioinformatics category. Welcome, Dr. Gil Alterovitz, to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Ira, for having me on the show, and it's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. It's an extremely timely and exciting topic. I'd like to start off, like we typically do, by handing things over to you for a few minutes just to introduce yourself. If you could sort of take us back a little bit to the beginning, sort of where you grew up, how you got interested in electrical engineering and biomedical engineering, and a little bit of your career path to date. I think that would be a great way to start out and lay the grounds for everything we're going to be talking about.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for that introduction. And when I look back on days growing up in Cleveland, I remember my dad working at NASA. He was I guess not exactly a rocket scientist, but like a satellite scientist per se, working on how do satellites communicate with each other, and and that was kind of my first exposure to seeing. To seeing science and how work happened, within the federal government. So that was, then kind of went after that, as you mentioned, to Carnegie Mellon. And my inspiration was really to understand how computers essentially, thought, or how they worked inside. And that was really interesting to do that. And then I started, thinking about, how can you apply, this technology? At that point, computers were just kind of, the microcomputers were really starting, and the internet was developing. And so how could you really use it to help people? That was really a kind of a motivator in those days, and it still is, certainly. And so the thinking is, how can you use this technology for good? I mean, any technology can be used, for good, for bad, for efficiency, for many different things. And it just seemed like a great opportunity at that point. And so I had an opportunity after graduating from Carnegie Mellon to go to Canada, actually spend a year there as a Fulbright. And that really allowed me to explore this area of bioinformatics, where you could really apply artificial intelligence toward looking at genomics and integrating clinical information and all that. And that's kind of where the career kind of went on from there. It's kind of this synergy. You need to develop the AI so you can better help the patients and understand the science. You need better science to be able to develop better algorithms that can work in some ways kind of like the brain, and have more flexibility in their learning models and so forth. And then, yeah, that's what led to, the graduate school to do that research. My first research was actually looking at how do you integrate different sensors. So you're, let's say, in an operating room, you've got all these sensors going off. How do you put together all that information together to make, to help physicians make a decision? Continued on to work on a particular AI technology called Bayesian networks, with one of the founders, one of the key founders in the area, and who created the first commercial Bayesian network program, Marco Ramoni, who's a really inspirational to me as well. He was kind of one of my PhD co-advisor, along with Zach Cohan, who's my other PhD advisor. And so that was, that's kind of how it started, and then became a, faculty at Harvard Medical, and wanted to see how is it that all of this can be applied at a large scale. And so when someone at that point had approached me from Washington, D.C. around applying for this White House Presidential Innovation Fellowship Program. It's a non-political program that brings technical expertise into government. And so applied for that and spent a little bit of time here working on a number of different things. And that really led me to think about there's just the scale that you can really make an impact on populations that really can benefit from these technologies, was really there. And so really excited then when opportunity came at the VA to really take this opportunity to, it's an opportunity to help veterans. It's an opportunity to really make a difference with these technologies. So that's kind of, I would say, the background, yeah.
Outstanding. And talking about that scale, as we talked on previous show with Rachel Romani, and when we look at the VA, 9 million plus enrolled veterans, 1,000 plus medical centers, outpatient clinics, hundreds of thousands of people working there, and now here you come along. You are the inaugural director of the National Artificial Intelligence Institute. You're responsible for integrating everything coming from this amazing mass of data. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the inception of the NAII, as it's abbreviated, your role as the inaugural director, and then if you could also, a three-part question here, sort of take us into this theme, which I've seen you talk a little bit about recently, in terms of artificial intelligence to go, especially in this world of the coronavirus pandemic, how we need to think about AI and the different ways we deploy it differently.
Right. So let's start with, kind of the motivation, as you said, for the Institute, how we got started. And,
please,
the VA really, it's, why AI at the VA really, as you said, makes sense. These 9+ million patients, you got a billion new images per year, over 1,000, facilities, over 100,000 doctors and nurses. And turns out that nearly 3/4 of U.S. doctors and nurses are actually, and the majority are trained in VA hospitals at some point in their career, maybe an internship or a fellowship and things like that. And so there's a great opportunity to leverage this technology and also have it be spread among those practitioners in the future, wherever they are. There is data in terms of genomics. There's the telehealth. It's a pioneer in that area. And so that's, that is the foundation, kind of the fuel. Data is the fuel for artificial intelligence. So that was there. What some of the other pieces were that at that point in time, a couple of years ago, the new National Artificial Intelligence a strategic plan was being developed. As you mentioned earlier, I was one of the writers on that. And so as in doing that, we were analyzing and looking at all the work that was going on across different agencies. And, it was very interesting that, in this agency, all these, there were all these opportunities, and that in research, there's a great opportunity to develop the capacity of AI research and development, right, within the VA. And so That was one of the motivating factors. And then the second factor was that around a couple years ago, this paper actually came out in Nature by the VA, and involved a collaboration with what's now the Google DeepMind, and that was basically leveraging deep learning artificial intelligence to predict acute kidney injury, or AKI, right? So what that enables you is really to have an early warning, and it really enabled you to have time to take preemptive action. And in doing so, by increasing fluids and so forth, you could actually prevent it from occurring. So that's that was very interesting, and but it took, it was a great paper and a great result. It did take quite a bit of time to set up all those agreements and all that work, and so when I saw that, I was starting to think, and talking to other people, what if we could have like a better a process, maybe not better, but a process that is scalable, right? One that would give opportunity to attract and work with industry, academia, or others around AI to leverage those best new methods that are coming out, and be able to do that either at the VA by leveraging that in some way, or having some of that data be used with those models, so that we could help the veterans with the latest technologies that are out there. And so that really kind of became another impetus for the NAII, which is around could we have these kind of AI tech sprints and things like that to be able to bring these different parties together. And so we ended up having thinking about what are areas that would be very useful around the VA, for especially in the areas of health and well-being, although of course AI can be used in a number of areas. And you see AI and these areas, this kind of work had been done, right? It's just that this is really a great opportunity to showcase and bring all this work together and help in really moving it forward and scaling it. And so that's what I think the NAII has helped to build and strengthen the community around artificial intelligence. And in fact, we have a community of interest and a few things where people are, we bring people together. So that's kind of the initial, thinking behind that, bringing together people within the VA across offices, bringing people from outside the VA to help and contribute in these areas. Mm-hmm. So I think that addresses one of your questions. And I think you made another one, or I'm not sure if I addressed the other one. So
the other one had to do with AI to go.
Yes. Oh, certainly. Yeah. Happy to address that too. And that relates to this as well, which is basically that one thing that was noticed that, and it's really great that there has been work around machine learning and AI and how that gets leveraged and applied into a number of different health and well-being and so forth, and a number of areas. And within research and development, we've seen papers with that. What is also very useful is to have that then be used operationally to help the veterans, that actual research. And so there have been a number of cases where operations leverages existing solutions that are out there, and that has been that's been great. And so this path in AI to go, the thinking is that you could go beyond the research paper that's published and go and actually try it out with and get feedback from clinicians and so forth. And so basically it is an approach where you can try out different algorithms in this pilot kind of setting, where you get feedback from clinicians, caregivers, and others around that. And just to give you an example, for around with COVID-19, there were a number of different algorithms that were developed to predict different things around COVID-19. How many, is this patient going to get worse? What will happen in a certain number of days, and things like that. And a number of researchers have developed different approaches both for predicting the same thing, let's say, mortality or ventilation need or things like that, as well as different needs, so whether, the beds will be needed, more beds are needed here, is palliative care needed? And so the thinking in AI2Go is that you could display multiple of these models together and be able to get feedback from clinicians and others about these, both in terms of, are these solutions, or do they use like explainable AI, or are they ways that the clinician will adopt because, the way it's implemented and designed, it is something that they can understand how the model is working, so they're more likely to adopt it, give that feedback, as well as, is it implementing trustworthy AI? There was recently an executive order. There had been 2 executive orders in the last few years, and one of them was about promoting American leadership in AI research and development, and making those data sets known and models and so forth. And the second one around trustworthy AI. And that one sets a minimum bar essentially for what counts as trustworthy AI. So if it doesn't meet, if applications in government don't meet that bar, not only at the VA but other agencies that are within the purview of that executive order, then they actually have to be retired. That's why it's a minimum bar, right? And this minimum bar includes things around, for example, that it should be regularly monitored, should be interpretable, and things like that. And so it should be lawful and respectful of the nation's values and things like that. So there are a number of items there. And so this approach with AI2Go, or AI point of care in the cases where it's used for point of care type things, the idea is to be able to solicit and get that feedback so that you have models that are useful. So we're thinking about it as almost like an iterative process, right? So rather than having a researcher develop a model and kind of throw it over a wall, via paper, because then it's whoever reads the paper, then it's their job in some sense to contact the author to implement it, or, maybe another step. The other thing is, what if it could be a communication? What if you could kind of open that wall and have, kind of like with a bank teller, you have a way to kind of pass, bills and things around like that. And eventually maybe even, talk together, like you can turn on the microphone, they can talk to you, the teller. So, so that is kind of the thinking. And so it won't be one way either way. So the models get implemented, designed, and then if they're written in this standardized way, they can then be used in this platform functionality such that the clinician can try it out and give feedback, and then the model can be adjusted or so forth, and they can compare different models and give feedback. So maybe one model is very accurate but not very interpretable, the other one is the other way. So it may not be that one model would have been perfect in any case, but they can give feedback like, oh, we would use this model in this case, and maybe in this other case I would use another one. So it's not necessarily that they're selecting out and a model won't be used, but maybe it'll be in specific cases, or maybe they can adjust the model in some way or integrate an ensemble of models. So that's the thinking there. We are actually, as an example of this, piloting some work with COVID-19 prediction, which is, rather than being used clinically, is being used operationally to help look at resourcing and things like that. So basically looking at doing that, and with a number, well, there are about a dozen sites right now, and we worked closely with the Washington DC VA to first collaborate. That was a collaboration to really try out the model in the first place, and then a number of sites are now piloting it. And what we found is really interesting. Like the work was originally designed around predicting certain variables, with the thought that maybe it would be used for allocating different resources and things like that for people who needed it more and things like that. But it actually found it interesting that it actually ended up being used in some other cases as well, like for understanding things that were pieces of operations that would be needed quite a bit in the future. So in some cases, it's not an immediate need, but maybe a need in maybe like 3 months or so. And so by knowing and looking at these predictions, they're able to look at operational needs that are needed quite a bit in the future, which wasn't the original kind of intent of the model, but through collaborating together, they discovered that additional use case. And so that is another area that potentially, one of the pilot sites discovered it, and they're then sharing that with others. And so you have kind of a process where not only we found out that it is the clinicians that then share back with the researchers and the developers, but also the clinicians are sharing among themselves in this pilot group. And so we're looking at that as a sort of a network, essentially a network that, these individuals, are sort of emerged on its own. It was very interesting.
I want to just to stress too for the people that are going to be watching or listening, as you were mentioning about sort of the ethics and sort of the principles that you develop alongside all this, and that people should go read the NAII website in terms of looking at how that you guys have done a very deep dive into sort of meeting these bars, and which are extremely important, whether we're talking about healthcare or other applications of artificial intelligence, that people get very concerned about this in 2021. Gil, you had mentioned the partnership with DeepMind and the VA and the Nature article on kidney disease. Are there some other cases? I think the term at the VA is actionable AI examples from research to implementation. A couple other interesting examples that you're fond of talking about?
Yeah, certainly lots of examples. I just want to mention about what you mentioned about the ethics and that area. So there's a number of pieces, for people to check out in that. Yep. The executive orders around trustworthy AI applies to to a large group of agencies, I would say. The VA also has a list of kind of data ethics principles that was developed by an office and published relatively recently. That is also very interesting, I think, for people to look at in terms of data. We're working now on an AI strategy that builds on a number of these pieces together. But in terms of your question about other kind of areas, and I think there is a lot of interesting use cases for AI, whether it be we've seen different, as I mentioned, there are a number of different offices working on a number of different pieces. One that comes to mind is there have been chatbots, a couple of different chatbots that we've seen that leverage conversational artificial intelligence in a number of areas. We've seen automation, essentially automation, AI to help in automation. So it may, for example, use optical character recognition and then process that text and analyze that text to help in automating different processes, whether it be forms or whether it be around clinical notes and extracting key information from there. There's a lot of research that is there's a lot of research and applications that are being looked at in the imaging space. That's another area that we've seen researchers in Tampa and other places that have been working on how do you integrate pathology slides in the cancer space, in the in other spaces, in infectious diseases. How do you put that together with information that you may get from scans, like more of gross anatomy or MRIs, CAT scan, those kind of larger types of images, all the way to integrating genomics information. And sometimes you can kind of involve all of those. When we started, we kind of made a list of sort of 5 areas that we thought were particularly kind of fundamental key areas at that point in time to look at. And every once in a while we'll be reevaluating these, but they involve deep learning. We mentioned that example already. Explainable AI, important for adoption. Interestingly, once something is adopted, sometimes explainable AI is not as needed once it is adopted. So for example, like Many years ago, if a blood test was developed, people would want to know all the details to make sure that they could trust it, right? There have been a number of cases recently where companies try to develop these tests that didn't work technically. They sounded like they could work, but on the technical items, there were some issues. So it needs to be sort of understandable at the very beginning, whether it be explainable, interpretable, or whatever subset. But afterwards, right now, you don't every day, the physician is not asking for how exactly does this blood test work once, they've accepted it, once it's been adopted, unless it changes again, right? Yeah. Which is what's interesting in AI, because it can learn, it can adapt and change. And that's why you need to potentially regularly monitor it if it is doing, if it is adapting. Privacy preserving AI, that's one that leads to a number of different use cases.
Sure.
And then, we mentioned trustworthy AI, and then there's multi-scale AI. And that's the one where I was kind of getting to where, you've got genomics at one level of scale, then you go all the way up to, well, then you have pathology slides or tissue biopsies and so forth that can lead to other types of staining and special stains and slides that you can analyze, all the way up to scans that look, body scans that look at the whole body or organs there. So those are the areas there: deep learning, explainable AI, privacy preserving AI, trustworthy AI, and multi-scale AI analysis that have a number of future-looking use cases that are really very interesting. Not to say that others don't, but these are ones that within the VA seem to be have been particularly applicable recently.
And how exactly do the AI tech sprints work in terms of allowing outside researchers and so forth to access the data? I know that this is one of the benefits of these models, which you've championed. You don't have to spend months doing a specific collaborative agreement with the government, but it allows for more free flow and use of the data.
Right. So the idea with the AI tech sprint is really, as you said, to sort of make it as simple as possible to allow for exploration of technologies, and it certainly can lead to potential collaborations in the future and partnerships and things like that. But it doesn't have to be. But in doing so, both are the organizations that are working through the process. They will have a chance to learn and see how the data and so forth and the models are within the VA. So it could be that their products in the future would help support such data in the future, which would be of benefit to veterans as well. At the same time, it also connects them with researchers, practitioners, and others at the VA, so that they can, so that what they design is something that potentially could be usable, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of another area there. And so everything is designed around that. There's a whole incentivization framework that basically is around different levels that recognize making the products more transparent, or making the data more available from the different products that are made, so that essentially the reward is not for getting the highest accuracy, but for having it be understandable in a way so that it can be evaluated in the future. So that's what it recognizes through that incentivization framework, and that's number one. And two, we also in this current season, we're now offering also a prize. There's like prizes, okay. There's prizes as well. And from our last year's session, we're also, as you said, kind of piloting this is a way to look at, could there be things that are done in the future? So based on last year's session, for example, we're going to we're looking at doing this contract for one of these potential technologies based on what came out of the last AI tech sprint, separate from any prizes and things like that. So our current AI tech sprint is ongoing. Our last one was around helping search for clinical trials, and one of the there were a couple of different things that came out of that. One of them is basically this tool that now anyone can use. Essentially, it's one of the first 5 apps on the VA App Store, and leverages deep learning and AI to help match veterans with their clinical trials. Was developed by one of the teams. And so basically it empowers 9+ million veterans. They also add actually capability for CMS beneficiaries, so anyone over 65 and others who use that can log in and have that information be used for finding trials that match them, their medical information. Only, of course, if they consent to do that, that enables that search to be more personalized for them, so that there aren't thousands of trials that they have to go through, but a much smaller set. So it's especially useful for in cancers, COVID, a number of different places where we've seen feedback from people that have found that useful. This year, the theme is around veterans that are not currently engaged with the VA. And so we're really excited to see in April, we're going to see some of the work, because they're now working on it, and through this 3-month sprint, we're going to see some of those results from that. So when you think about it, I mean, the AI tech sprint, it's almost like when someone let's say gets a contract or something, that is a very strong commitment, almost like a marriage in some sense, right? But the AI tech sprint, there is no commitment per se, but it is something that can lead to other things in the future, and it's something that really also just enables people to understand how the VA works and how we can help in serving that mission.
And also, Gil, along those lines, when obviously you have this major portfolio of projects that you're responsible for. At the same time, AI, obviously someone like me that I don't have a lot of experience with AI, it's such a new concept. I come out of the sort of the drug development area, and I think I saw at a report recently that there's over 180 companies alone in my industry that are doing something with artificial intelligence and drug discovery. I'd just like to, if you could say a few words for how someone like you that is in a role where not just you just have to use these systems, but also you have to constantly evaluate the new stuff, and it's constantly probably coming, all different types of AI, and hey, I got a new model here. How do you do the due diligence in all this? I mean, obviously, this is a major part of, as you review new things that come into the VA system. Yeah, this is good. No, this is nonsense. Talk a little bit about that due diligence that you're responsible for.
Right. So, so basically, I many times will act kind of like a subject matter expert on different parts of AI. So that's one area. There may be, there are a number of different parts of the VA that may leverage AI, right? And so I'll often do that. And in fact, if you think about it, the AI tech sprint, kind of one of the first motivations of it. So there was there were earlier versions that eventually led to the AI tech sprint. There was a program when I was the White House Presidential Innovation Fellow that we worked on with HHS and with Census Bureau and others. That basically was around engaging industry, not specifically around AI, but in other ways. And so what I noticed was that a number of different companies would show their wares and different things that they have, and it was really hard to compare them because they would say they have 99% accuracy or someone has 95% accuracy, but they were comparing against different things, their own data, their own metrics. How would it apply in these agencies? How would it apply in the actual use case, right? And so that was one of the reasons actually of doing the AI, of setting up an AI tech sprint and having this incentivization framework, which of AI-able ecosystem, which basically it incentivizes the different organizations to make their work more transparent and to use the type of data that we actually will use, right? And so in doing so, what we see is we're able to point people and say, oh, okay, see, this is a way that it can be done where we can compare and see what you have versus another one. And that is a way that you can essentially compare an apple to an apple rather than an apple and orange, right? So, so the AI tech sprint also has helped in that way. But yeah, it's always a challenge, I think, when you have new technologies, because there's kind of new ways of doing the same thing, but it may have a disadvantage, right? And so you have to kind of look under the hood and sometimes understand the underlying technology before making an assessment on it. And looking at accuracy is not enough. In fact, that was something that we ended up really seeing a lot also in the COVID-19 or many other areas, where we'd see all these papers coming out, 99% accuracy, and accuracy measured by different types of metrics. There are different types of performance metrics that were used. And so what we've come to see is that you have to be careful about the performance metrics, the type of data, what biases there may be in the underlying data. Does it apply from their situation to your situation? I mean, all these things are especially important with AI technologies like deep learning, which sometimes don't have that are not as explainable as some other technologies that you might have, or simpler methods like logistic regression, where you can more easily look underneath and see why it's making its conclusion. And so there's a number of tests and ways of thinking about that and checklists that we're developing as a way to make sure that people have thought about those concepts as they're developing and applying their model, because the model is often basically reflective of the data that it was used to make it. And so if we just receive a model, that essentially may not be good enough to evaluate. So we need to understand how it was built, what kind of data was used, and so forth. And so the checklist can be used, for that kind of process and one that we're working with.
Excellent. Gil, one other question for you, actually related to your book, Systems Bioinformatics, and Engineering Case-Based Approach. I was just interested because you do an extensive dive into genomics, proteomics, cellular networks. Really, as you're talking about, sort of the hierarchical, multi-level components of sort of what makes us whole. And then there's, I found it very interesting. You have a couple chapters in here. One on synthetic biology. Sort of building synthetic biology from parts, and then there's another chapter on sort of the dynamics of chemotaxis and sort of single cell organisms and populations. Obviously, this is separate from the VA interest, but a couple of weeks ago we talked to Mike Levin up at Tufts, who recently was creating these little xenobots, sort of these synthetic life forms on the computer. I was just separate from VA. I was just interested in if your personal interest in the area of synthetic biology and novel sort of life forms using these technologies in silico.
Yeah, so not speaking on behalf of the VA,
Sure.
because that work was kind of done. I think that book came out a few years back.
Sure.
We actually got interest from other countries recently interested in translating that book. But yeah, that reflects some of the work where basically when you think about methods like artificial intelligence or machine learning, they can be used for a number of different purposes, right? And so there are ways that you can use it to design certain treatments or different accommodating different needs. So that's what that work focused on. And I interacted with iGEM, which is this. I've been a judge for iGEM, which is this international genetic engineering modification competition. It's like the sort of kind of competition / conference that brings together a lot of people in this area from around the world, and I'd focused on the software aspects of that. Cool. So people would design. So you can think about almost a computer-aided design, but instead of designing, like a 3D printer. 3D printing is designing a cup or something like that. It's designing a modification to a gene or a protein, so that, for example, if light were to hit that object, it would capture. It would be like a photograph. The different cells would capture the light in a way that's almost like film. That was one of the earlier projects that we saw. So how do you design? I'd focused on the software part, but there's the wet lab part. There are different components. So yeah, I think it's really interesting how there is synergy between different fields. So like I said before, you can use technologies for different in different ways, and
Yep.
That's an area that's certainly growing as well. It's an area that we've just when that book was written was just starting, but seen a lot of growth as well.
Yeah, no, really, I'm, as a sort of layperson in this area, I'm totally amazed by all these potential opportunities. I was just rather intrigued by that as well, just as a fascination of the scope of what you can do with these tools and what you've written about. Gil, coming back to you now, obviously you've had a fascinating career to date. You've no doubt met many very interesting people in academia and government and industry. You mentioned Zach Honey up at Harvard in terms of one of your mentors. Any other people, mentors, other influencers throughout your career that have been very influential in keeping you on this path that you might want to mention, shout out to at this point in the show?
Yeah, well, there are really so many. I feel almost like if I were to say one or two, then I'd be leaving others. Sure. But of course, family. My family has been quite inspirational. I think I mentioned the story about my dad and my mom. My brother's also a faculty. He actually does robotics. So kind of an area of artificial intelligence for motion planning. I have a son who's now just a little over a year, and he's really been inspirational in many ways because, as you see a baby develop, it's just amazing to see just how hard essentially AI in some ways is, and yet it happens so quickly, with humans and they're developing their personality and how, AI still has quite a bit of ways to go before it kind of develops kind of those personalities and things. Yep. I think the other person, I mentioned Marco Ramoni earlier, right? He was the other yep. Co-advisor who's really influential in many ways on, just my thinking, personality, and his approach to life was really inspirational as well. But yeah, there, I can think of, in grade school teachers, who got me interested in science and yeah, in DC, there are a few people who kind of introduced me to DC, which was really
sure.
Great, and to to stay true to focusing on the mission and not kind of like being not focusing on the mission and not kind of other things that are maybe going on kind of simultaneously. So that's really been great as well. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Gil, it's been fascinating listening to you and hearing about this amazing portfolio that you're responsible for and everything that's going to be coming down the pike at the VA with regard to these tools. It's a really exciting time, and wishing you the best with all of it. For everybody that's going to be listening to this episode on the podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Dr. Gil Alterovitz, Director of the National Artificial Intelligence Institute at the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. Check out his book, Systems Bioinformatics, an Engineering Case-Based Approach. Gil, it's been a really great time. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us. Thank you for everything that you're doing for the 9 million plus veterans of this country and everyone that works at the VA. And then obviously, as we say on the show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow via all the work that you do. It's been very inspirational listening to you.
Thank you, Ira, and thank you for the work that you do in bringing and communicating this important message to the public, so that people really, can see that there's just a world of possibilities out there, and it's just a matter of just making an effort to take action and move from there. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful.